Absolutely.
Oh man.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. We're back for another episode of the Ship Show series. Today's Thursday, August 10th, 2023, and this is episode number 30 in our yearly series. As usual, Jason and I are going to have great content and commentary, but this week we've got a really great subject, and that is basically the H1 state of the industry for logistics. Really, what has happened over the last 6 months, the first half. So, we're going to break down each mode and the big changes that we can expect over the coming 6 months. So, with that, I'm going to pass it over to my amazing co host, Jason Brand. Jason, what's happening?
Oh man, what is not happening? I feel like every single week, I have to say that, but it's so true. Wow, so much has happened this year, so much that prediction wise we've got scheduled for the rest of the year. I mean, it's truly crazy. So thank you so much for joining. We've got people who join from all over the state. So if it's good morning to you. If it's afternoon, good afternoon to you. And I'm the director of outreach and partner development here at Supply Chain Solutions. So what we do at Supply Chain Solutions, we basically provide a one-stop shop for all your logistics needs. That means we cover all the end-to-end services. We actually ship to and from over 160 countries a year. And we also have an expansive warehouse network as well. We've got an integrated technology solution that basically takes all of our different tools and it bundles them together. So it's our transportation management, our inventory management, our document and customs management, our data management, and it's all brought together and we customize it for your team based on what you want to see and what your teams need to see. It's very cool. So if you are looking for a new logistics provider, or if you just want to kind of clean house and hey, save some money this year, because it's definitely a chance to save some money, especially with rising costs, give us a call. We'll help you out. Anthony opened us up wonderfully because, yeah, we got a big task today. We got to talk about state of the industry H1. And I got to be honest, we're probably going over. And that being said, if we've got to carry this into next week's freight market roundup, that's totally fine. We can bring it all together as well. So make sure you're tuning in next week too. So I guess before we dive into the specifics, I think the most important thing we have to discuss is just the market at large. And actually, I had the greatest experience yesterday. I had the opportunity to go to this in-person event that was held by the Van Andel Global Trade Center. And the keynote speech at this event was just phenomenal. It was from this absolutely brilliant economist, also awesome speaker. I mean, I've not laughed so hard at a keynote speech ever, even though it was doom and gloom, let me tell you. But yeah, he spent a very long time breaking down what's going on in our economy, but also what's going on a global economic scale in the different economies around the world, and some of the factors that are happening in a post-COVID environment, and kind of the pathway as he sees it to normalcy. And I think there's a ton of things we could talk about, really, and we could spend a whole episode breaking that down. But I think some of the key takeaways from his speech was just the reinforcement of some points that Anthony and I have been saying, but just with more detail, more depth, and more teeth to it. And we don't, if we're going to simply put some of his takeaways, so we don't have the demand we need essentially right now, and because of that, we don't have that demand to bring a swift process back to normalcy. And so with the lack of that demand, we're seeing that being reflected in areas like, for example, the LTL market and the demise of Yellow, but also the ocean market with just these historic numbers of blank sailings and these massive capacity shifts. And not to mention these rates that when you adjust them for inflation are the lowest rates we've ever had, ever. And so, if you add to this low demand dilemma, our U.S. logistics systems, they're still broken. I mean, we're still dealing with congestion. We're still dealing with problems. And so we're barely in the realm of efficiency when we should be all right. And, I hate to say it, but, and I hate to say the word doomed, but we sort of are doomed to this inefficiency. And there's a lot of factors to do with this. But one key reason is this anti-automation sentiment of our industry's unions. And I totally understand as well, because we've gone through a series of union negotiations. Anthony and I have covered a bunch of them. And really, we are at a huge turning point. And, we got to figure out how automation and, just maintaining our jobs can live harmoniously. But, at the same time, we also need to figure out how we can keep the general overhead costs of shipping down to as low and as manageable and as a consistent point as possible for people. So, the economy can run smoothly. Now, in other areas, obviously, we've got infrastructure. And I think infrastructurally, we all understand where we are and where we need to be. But, if we think about things like the widespread adoption of electric trucks and cars and some of those initiatives that have gone out, we need to be able to upgrade our infrastructure just to carry the amount of weight that's going to be increased from our roads and our bridges with those inclusions. So, I really can go on this, but like a good final point that we mentioned, and I wanted to kind of talk about this in the trucking area, but really we have to increase our domestic production, because right now it's at a very low point. And a lot of the positive economic news of the recent weeks, including these higher projections of GDP or gross domestic product and the expansion, it really hasn't reached the manufacturing sectors yet. And the problem is those sectors generate the most US freight. And this is being reflected if you look at the Purchasing Managers Index. So right now, PMIs, not to be confused with private mortgage insurance, but Purchasing Managers Indexes are below 50. And locally, our July reading was right at a 46. So if we want to quick break down these numbers, just so you have an idea of what does a 46 mean? What does a 50 mean, for a PMI standpoint? So if you've got a PMI reading of above 50%, that indicates that the manufacturing and service sector is expanding. And essentially, the higher above 50 a PMI is reading, the faster the expansion. A PMI reading, I don't know why this is a tongue twister for me, of below, I was like PMI, I don't know. But if it's below 50, you're contracting. And the farther below 50, the further the contraction. And then a PMI reading of 50 means there's no change. So if you consider there's almost a no change situation happening. So not expansion, not contraction, but technically speaking, right below in contraction globally. But then you look at the US and it's definitely in, early stages of contraction when it comes to PMI. Now, Anthony, I'm going to take this opportunity to quick step into the trucking realm. But as I just mentioned a minute ago about how that US manufacturing success is a huge generator of US freight, the GDP growth that we've been hearing about and that we're, expecting, it's not being seen universally. So a good example of this is the plastics and the resin production realm. Both of those areas are depressed. And actually, specifically, production of paper products, including pulp, is currently at the lowest level seen since the 1970s. Now, why do those industries matter for trucking? Well, the best way of looking at this is both of those industries play in the truckload market frequently and substantially, but they also are more or less, I think the best way of putting them is universal inputs into feeds that go into, industrial production. So because manufacturing generates around 60% of the ton miles hauled for the four hire motor carriers, if you see a decline in these two materials, you're generally seeing a decline in production plans. So this is kind of an upstream view of production problems. So keep that in mind. Now, if we leave that industrial manufacturing realm and we go right over to the trucking and we look at employment numbers, trucking firms added around 1,200 jobs in July, and before seasonal adjustment, that's the 1,200 number. But if you really think what is 1,200 in the grand scheme of things, it's actually the record for the lowest numbers of jobs added in about 12 years in the trucking sector. So the previous record was held back in July of 2016, and that number was 2,100 jobs added before being seasonally adjusted. So pretty substantial difference. Also, it's particularly alarming because, we just lost 30,000 jobs because of yellow. And another thing to note is that's not factored into this low number. That's actually going to be happening next month in August. So if you see a particularly low number in August, keep in mind that is factoring in the loss of those 30,000 jobs at yellow as well. But I don't want to just be all boom and gloom. I think doom and gloom. Oh my gosh. One thing we have to keep in mind, I know I'm just tripping on words right now. But there is something we do have to keep in mind, and that is that, despite seeing this very, very low number of new jobs in the trucking industry, we're still well above record highs. Actually, employment in the trucking sector right now is booming in general. So, what's happening with this tightening job market, it's more likely a symptom of the sector just trying to return to normalcy after overheating during the pandemic. So, July 1,200, which was way lower than the lowest which we've seen the past 12 years, and it was a 0.3% increase from the month before. If you look on a 2-year comparison now to 2 years ago, we're still around 6% higher in the sector when it comes to employment numbers. So it's still extremely high. It's doing fantastic. And actually, you take a look at how trucking employment has been since 2018. I mean, it really took off during the pandemic. So, and it was on the decline as we even were prior to the pandemic. So keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to get off that soapbox, Anthony. I need to sort my tongue out so I can speak. Can you do a couple things for me? Tell me anything I'm missing in the trucking realm, but also just walk us into the LTL realm as well.
Well, of course, we're going to do that, but there's a couple of things that I do want to bring up real quick. And, I actually have some bad news for our viewers. Really, I guess we could have called this episode of the Ship Show today the Great Logistics Reset, because the era of building supply chains solely around cost reduction considerations is over. Rather, there's a new value that really is going to take hold, and that's resilience in your supply chain. And as Jason and I do a lot of our research and review, we're creatures of habit in that respect, trying to keep our fingers on the pulse of the ebb and flow of the market. I think the first half of 2023, as it relates to, U.S. business logistics in the industry and global business logistics, I think really, I thought about it, and really we should have called it Revenge of the Shipper. 2023 is the year of the Revenge of the Shipper. It might be an accurate title to reflect the mood of the market. And that covers all modes of shipping, whether it's truck, rail, ocean, air, it covers everything. But instead, I really settled with a little tongue in cheek, and I like to call it the Great Reset. And it's a title that really paints a picture of a rapidly changing logistics environment in sharp contrast, with the pandemic affected years of 2020 and 2021. And I think really the big news is that supply chains are still largely out of sync from the effects of the pandemic, and those days are sort of over. I think the concessions that were given during the pandemic, whether it's LTL, FTL, whether it's air, whether it's ocean, they're getting all clawed back right now, folks. And, when you think about it, the U.S. business logistics costs soared to $2.3 trillion over the course of 2022. And that grew from 19.6% in 2021. So that represents really a 9.1% difference in the nation's gross domestic product. And the highest percentage of that cost compared with GDP in the deregulated area was 7.5%, which was just 2 years ago. But I think really the point of it is that it's now becoming increasingly clear that shippers and carriers are united by a need to think more collaboratively and proactively about building new strategic capabilities. Okay. And however, such agility can't be achieved overnight. It's going to take a lot of planning, extensive resources, as well as top level executive commitments from the C-suites in all companies. And it takes money and it takes time. And, contrary to past years when we had double-digit growth, like Jason was talking about, year over year, supply chain demand for the remainder of this year. And even though, you see articles out there, you get consensus in the industry that people will say, hey, it's turning around, it's turning around. I personally think it's not turning around, and I think it's going to remain stagnant or possibly diminish this year because of the lingering uncertainties in both the US and the global markets. And, with a modest GDP growth, worldwide last year, rather in the United States, and according to the International Monetary Fund, which forecasted 2.9% growth this year, you could see that GDP growth at 3.1% was really modest. So I think, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, Jay, the era of building supply chains solely around cost reductions and considerations is over. Rather, a new value is taken hold. It's called resilience. Everyone has to start getting into this mentality of having a resilient supply chain. And the best way to achieve that resiliency are not always obvious. They often involve trade-offs among some of the core priorities, such as speed and service and optionality and savings. So these calculations are only becoming more complex and nuanced with time. Um, I do a lot of research, just like Jason, and I really don't think. I think the current market conditions that we're in is going to linger until this point in 2024. And from many of the economists and different industry insiders, people that we have tremendous relationships with, that we respect a great deal, I really think, we're not going to see a real turnaround until the halfway point of 2024, despite what we're hearing with, from some of the industry insiders. And I will tell you that, when we were talking about, it being the shippers market, whether, like Jason said, whether it's LTL or ocean or FTL or air freight, you know, it's really going to stay. We're going to see a general rate increase again on August 15th on the ocean freight side. So that's three consecutive increases, GRIs, general rate increases on the ocean side. So, and we could talk about this, through all modes, whether it's truck, rail, parcel, okay, air freight. Jason, I don't want to hog too much of your time up, but
good. That's good.
Yeah.
If you think about ocean shipping, because that's a really, really great point. Yeah, I think the ocean shipping market and the idea of the revenge of the shipper, that's a really good comparison there. And unfortunately, you're dealing with these international companies versus dealing with like US based companies when you're dealing with your trucking and things like that. So there's a little bit difference of a cadence there. But I mean, the dilemma is real. So, and I also love what you said about return to normalcy not being till at least 12 months from now, and I totally agree with that. I think we've all heard this saying before, but like a rising tide floats all boats. And when it comes to the logistics industry, you think of peak season as the yearly kind of tide rising. And if we're not seeing that tide rising, we know by now, then it's basically spelling, okay, we're not getting through a regular cycle when it comes to logistics this year. And until we can, you're not going to see things operate in the way they need to. So,
right. And just one quick thing, Jay.
Yeah.
One quick thing about that, and that's a great analogy about what you said about the rising tide. I mean, when you think about it, in 2022, the market swung back sharply in shippers' favor, a trend that really has largely continued for the first half of 2023 across all modes of transit. Shipper demand and carrier capacity have rebalanced somewhat, and inventories are really ample. and the quirky demand spikes, of the quarantine era from the pandemic have now leveled off. So, when we say inventories are ample, we get everyone understands that, but there's still a lot of inventory out there. So, what I would say to everyone listening to our show, the time to fine tune is now. Savvy shippers are advised to fine tune their logistics strategies now, because what's worked to survive the pandemic era years may no longer be the best approach now. And, in 2023, the shippers market will come to an end during the fourth quarter of this year. That is in stone, and into the first quarter of 2024. So, as we get into the fourth quarter and go into the first quarter of 2024, that shippers market is coming to an end, and no shipper should be caught off guard unless they've ignored the needs and the opportunity to improve their capabilities of their shipper's choice behavior. That's why you need to work with a company like Supply Chain Solutions, who is an integrated logistics solutions provider. And as you've heard Jason and I say many times, our first customer came to us and said, make that work. And we did it because we believe that operational consulting leads to implemented value. And the volatility of the freight market is even affecting long-standing day-to-day activities for supply chain. Even the annual bidding process for carrier services being threatened. So, Jay, go ahead. I don't want to take too much time up, but you made me think of a few thoughts there.
Yeah, you got me thinking of a lot of things too. I want to talk a little bit because we bridged the gap into ocean shipping, and Anthony's definitely right. So what did we see over the course of the beginning of the year when it came to ocean shipping? We saw just a completely flattening of rates. We also saw in the East Coast, the last kind of lane standing, Europe to the US East Coast, maintaining almost 4 times the normal rate for the ocean shipping portion into the East Coast until nearly March, and then a very steady drop off of that rate level. And that came also with the capacity reduction. The beginning of this year, what did we also see when it comes to ocean shipping? We saw a lot of union negotiations. And, thankfully, I can say that we've got a couple major ones behind us. So we've got the ILWU in the USA. That's dealt with, thankfully. That was really getting to a point where it was going to seem like it was going to go on for way too long. It still was almost approaching a year of negotiation, which is just wild. But ILWU dealt with in the USA I think it was the 4th or the 6th of this year, last week, this week, whatever. We had the Canadian ILWU actually ratify their agreement, and we had both the port and the union. So that thankfully is sealed. Now I could say we have a new norm that's going to be entering for the US West Coast. The US East Coast, on the other hand, that was the solution for a lot of shippers. That's the reason why those rates were so high, because the ILWU was making the West Coast unstable. But now you've got this situation with the East Coast under their contract negotiations. And quite frankly, they've got an uphill battle there, particularly the union. And that is because of these in Georgia. They've got the Georgia Port Authority kind of built a facility designed around hybrid work, and the unions kind of made it their goal to take that down and essentially make it fully union. So that's going to be a pretty interesting battle. It's going to get pretty heated. And, I think one of the things we need to talk about just going forward a little bit, because we've talked obviously a lot about these union negotiations, but the reason why is they've been hitting our industry very hard. And quite frankly, the timing of these union negotiations was like a perfect storm when considering what's happened during the pandemic, inflation, also just like the amount of stress our industry was under, just a really perfect storm. And now we're seeing the unions really make away like bandits in a lot of these negotiations. And that's going to come back and affect the costs across the board for everyone. So, yes, ILWU, we're at a new norm, but we desperately need to figure out a way we can automate these ports, because we need an area where throughput is effective, and we're not just working within, hey, there's our maximum volume we're seeing, we can work with that. We need to be prepared for states where we're going to see growth. Now, the next ocean shipping going for the next half of the year, what are we expecting? just like Anthony said, we're going to see a barrage of GRIs, and it's already started. There is still a ton of capacity that's coming online. And I put somewhere in my notes, yeah, global order book capacity is close to 30% of the active fleet. And we've got 7 million TEUs that are going to be delivered before the end of, 7 million TEUs in total, and 2.5 million TEUs that are going to be delivered before the end of this year, and another 3 million TEUs by the end of 2024. And then, as you can do the math, there's still a couple more million coming in the following.
That's going to really blow up the market, right? Could you imagine when all that capacity comes in?
And just feeding into exactly what you said, what the general consensus is, supply is going to outpace demand for at least 12 months, if not 18 months. And so coming right into this time next year, we should still expect capacity is going to be, over the top. Now, there is a little caveat that I want to mention, and that's the IMO and that whole regulation. That could also see a lot of capacity tightening as well. So as we start 2024 and as what's been the data collection period ends and we switch to the enforcement period, then we're going to really see what these carriers are going to have to do. And also, I hate to say it, they're going to squirm a little bit because Anthony and I have been on, we check out the earnings calls for a lot of these ocean carriers because they're just full of, you get to hear from the carrier themselves. They're full of juicy details. But I kind of have to scold them a little bit. They're going to have to learn how to deal with their investors, and they're going to have to learn how to change their business practice going forward. And the reason why is the Q1 earning call sounded almost identical to the Q2 earning call. And it basically said, yeah, we knew we wouldn't do well, but we're already seeing demand picking back up. They said that in Q1, and then the same thing happened in Q2, and they kind of lied with statistics. I hate to say, you can't even say that, but you know what I mean. It's kind of a tunnel vision view.
Well, let's think about this for a second, Jay, real quick. Okay? Just to piggyback on what you said, if you don't mind. So let's think about bid processes and contracts and how that ties into what you just said. So, annual bids, which traditionally have given both shippers and carriers a base of certainty for capacity and rates, has in many cases been recast as just another component of how shippers engage with carriers, third-party logistics providers, and freight forwarders, rather than the definitive last word. I like to say, everyone knows I've been in this business a long time, and it's not like the old days where you negotiated your contract and you were good, and there was a certain methodology with how you interacted with your suite of carriers, whether it's air, whether it's ocean, whether it's LTL, FTL, whether it's rail. Now, many bids are more frequent touch point. These mini bids with these little frequent touch points are becoming the norm as shippers look for a closer market engagement. And when you think about it, where does that leave the carriers, like Jason was just talking about when he talks about revenue? Well, they're scrambling to find decent yielding freight that fits into an increasingly complex national and international network. So there's no denying that most freight haulers and ocean carriers and air carriers are indeed in a tight spot. And I think one avenue is for carriers to more actively seek to become true strategic partners with their shippers. And that's the same thing we're asking our existing clients and our potential clients to really lock in that true partnership between you and SCS, because everyone is now doubling down on such qualities like reliability and visibility and the comprehensiveness of the service. For example, when you deal with supply chain solutions, it's total. It's transportation, operations, tracking, and logistics, end-to-end capabilities. And some of the larger carriers are looking to do this by offering turnkey 4PL capabilities, which we do at Supply Chain Solution. But However, when you think about it, there's even a larger development forming between shippers and carriers alike. And I'd like to suggest, like, everyone's found a more common ground, okay? And that development is there's going to be a major shift in the role of logistics across the entire economy. And we're going to see that. Before the pandemic, logistics was still largely considered a side function. That's no more. That's not going to be that way anymore moving forward. And remember, Jason said this, over a year ago. The pandemic put the digitization of our industry in hyperdrive. Now it's widely seen as a core determinant of service and revenue outcomes and a strategic differentiator. And I'd like you to say that word 3 times. So, Jason, back to you, but it's going to be very challenging as we move into 2024. And I'm sorry for hogging up your time there, Jay.
No, it's perfect. I want to go back to something you said when you talked about how a lot of carriers at this point are kind of clawing back some of the benefits that they were giving during the pandemic. And that's incredibly true. And I also think that's the importance of really hyper-focused on managing your supply chain, at least for the next 12 months. I'm expecting really that 12 to 18 month window. We got to figure out what's going on with ocean capacity, because that is going to be a factor. But, you figure that's happening in the ocean realm. And before I go too far down this rabbit hole, there has been a massive shift to Mexico as well. And I want to quick talk on that, even though we're going to have to wrap it up pretty quick here. But with those clawbacks, I think what's critical that we're seeing right now is we've had a couple customers come in and they're just not getting good rates, and they're not even market rates right now. And so that's the reason why Anthony and I are really trying to emphasize that this is really the time to be hyper-focused, because there's opportunities to lock in some really great service and some great rates with some unique and catered solutions. But if you are, if you're not spending a lot of time on it, carriers are trying to make back some of the money they've been losing. And if we can, literally, we've had union negotiations happening throughout the board, and more still scheduled for the remainder of this year. So if you can, you've got to really manage it right now, because, companies are not doing as well as they'd like to, and they're looking for a couple customers to pad some of their numbers. So keep that in mind. I want to quick mention what I just said about Mexico, though. So we actually had a titanic shift happen, and it was really kind of formalized this year. And that is that our largest importer is now Mexico. And you need to keep that in mind, because, shippers losing confidence in shipping goods from the other side of the world cost effectively and reliably after the pandemic has really fueled Mexico becoming the manufacturing sector of the US. And that really says a couple of things. It says talks on that same point of clawbacks. You need to be very careful in the ocean shipping industry, because they're losing customers permanently, and they're going to try to short-term make some of that lost revenue back. But then in the long term, the ocean shipping industry needs to change itself, and it needs to rebrand itself, and they need to instill trust in the shipper that, yes, we can be a cost-effective, reliable solution, and you can rely on us in the good times and the bad times. And unfortunately, with what's been going on in contract season every year, as Anthony talked about as well, and just kind of, I'd say, not respect of those contracts, they have a long road ahead of them in that department. Anthony, any closing words on that?
Yeah, just one thing. And I mean, what you said is so key, Jason, about Mexico and about how companies are starting to think about, resourcing and near sourcing and all that. There was a great article that, when I woke up today at 5 a.m., there was a great article about how China's economy is now in negative growth for the first time in 4 years. But I think to sum it up, as the logistics sector moves forward from years of supply chain challenges and bottlenecks, it is time to begin thinking seriously, as we said, and proactively when it comes to building strategic capacity and strategic partnerships, just like strategic partnerships with supply chain solutions. And although the market has swung back in shippers' favors to the detriment of the carriers, unfortunately, we cannot emphasize enough the importance for all industry participants to begin planning for, and heaven forbid, we don't want any of this to happen, but it's, we can't stick our heads in the sand anymore, folks. We have to plan for geopolitical tensions. We have to plan for cybersecurity threats. We have to think about climate change. We have to think about the related natural disasters. Look what's going on in the Hawaiian Islands in Maui right now. 36 people dead this morning, unfortunately, from the tornado and some of the things going on over there in Hawaii with some different things you've probably seen on the news. We're going to see the slowing of e-commerce growth and a potential for global recessionary factors. So these are all things that we're tracking, but now is the time. Start thinking about it. Don't wait till December. And if you guys need anything, please reach out to Jason and myself. We have a tremendous team at Supply Chain Solutions with some great minds, and we will be there to help you through these turbulent waters. And with that, Jason, I know I hogged up a lot of your time today. Back to you. So sorry.
No, it's all good. Hey, thank you guys for joining us so much today. So obviously we went through a few modes and we've got a few more to do. Next week, we have our freight market roundup scheduled, but we'll also try to bake in a little bit more of those updates from the other modes we didn't cover today. Obviously, it has been a very interesting multiple years, but the beginning of this year was also very, very fascinating as well. And we're seeing probably some industries changing permanently because of it. So next week, I'd like us to start off with the LTL portion, because the demise of Yellow in this, is going to be, it's a massive effect that we need to talk about how that's going to be affecting you going forward. But, as always, thank you so much for joining. And Anthony, close us off.
So just remember, folks, at Supply Chain Solutions, global presence, local expertise, and make it a great day.
Make it a great day. Thank you for joining.
Take care, guys. Thank you so much.